we'll just kick it off here. Thank you all so much for being here. And a really big thank you for those that are returning from our snafu that happened, it was in the beginning of May, our initial launch. We had massive technical issues. We're over them now, and then it's been a lot for everybody. So finally, we are able to welcome you to the first episode in the series, The Women of Regenerative Ag. I'm so excited to be doing this finally. I'm Aurora Flynn. This is Precious Phiri. She's joining us from Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe today. Feel free to say hi, Precious. Before we get into all of the beautiful questions today, I wanted to give a little bit of context to the show, a little bit of housekeeping, a teeny bit about myself, and a real proper introduction for Precious. So the idea behind these interviews was to explore the wisdom and the worlds of the transformative women that are leading the regenerative agricultural movement around the globe. Now, while this is a platform for women, these are all extraordinary beings, right? These are pioneers, they're trailblazers. They have been trailblazing phenomenal and critical shifts in these seemingly intractable and unsustainable systems for a long time. An underlying theme of this show is to really look at the realm of transformation itself. So that's across size and scale and dimensionality. So we really are talking about from that very internal landscape of human consciousness to that outer manifestation in the world around it, be it in the form of agricultural practices and techniques and management, culture, to the built environment itself. Briefly, a little bit about myself. For lack of a better phrase, I'm a transformation specialist. I have a background in design and development of sustainable and resilient communities, regenerative agriculture, holistic management. I'm a California naturalist. I am a filmmaker as well, and I have a master's of environmental management. I'm currently an independent research scholar at the Ronan Institute, where my work centers on the transformation capacity of socio-ecological systems. So I am pulling apart our communities based in culture, identity work, psychology, sociology, neurology, right? Looking at the facets of the human being in relationship to ecology and carbon footprints, and understanding those transformative mechanisms and drivers that moves it all. That's my passion and fascination. I'm also the owner and director of the Outer Borders Agency. We do training and facilitation with communities, consulting to help move those layers I was just talking about. And I am the creator of this show, and I will be your host. So last couple of things, this series is a joint venture with Soil for Climate, and we're thrilled to be doing this together with my agency. And our sponsor is RE Botanicals, the hemp apothecary. And we are just incredibly grateful for the support of John Rulak, and the belief in this work means a lot to a lot of human beings. So thank you tremendously. Like I said, we will be taking questions. We look forward to them. Precious and I are going to jump into some juicy dialogue, and then we'd love you to just kind of take in what is occurring and what's emerging, and from there be inspired to ask her questions today. So Precious is a smallholder farmer, a regenerative agricultural practitioner, a trainer based in Zimbabwe. She's an accredited field professional for holistic management education for communities by the Savory Institute. She works with rural communities through her organization Earth Wisdom, as well as other partners in Southern and East Africa to regenerate degraded communal lands. Precious is the African coordinator for Regeneration International and is a part of their steering committee. Her role is to connect with other work going on in the African region and to continue bringing this work to the global movement. Precious, thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure and an honor.
Thank you, Aurora. I laugh a lot, so I hope that's all right.
Bring it. We love giggles. This is, the world needs it. Time for furious laughing and dancing. Um,
Yeah.
Listen, I want to touch base with you because when we did, when we last tried to speak, in May, lockdown had happened for you in Zimbabwe for a couple of weeks. The president was looking at lifting it that coming Monday. Simultaneously, the food agency at the UN dropped that incredible announcement that we were looking at, you know, a sort of a biblical proportion level of a global hunger pandemic. And they were, a focal point was Zimbabwe. And they were saying this was because of the coronavirus lockdown and the reactions to it. And of course, that perfect storm doesn't just happen in a silo, right? They're talking about a tipping point of multiple systems for a lot of different reasons. And we aren't going to go into all those reasons today. But I would love to just start by hearing what it's been like for you, what's been going on, what it's like on the ground now. What are the biggest current concerns for communities? Can you help us just be there with you to kind of understand what that's like?
Okay. Well, maybe first of all, just to say hi to everyone who's watching on Facebook Live.
We have people watching? No.
Yes, we do. And thank you to you, Aurora, and Soul for Climate for organizing this. And episode 1, I'm the first person to speak, and Aurora said it's going to be juicy. I don't know about that, but I hope that you find it juicy. Well, I mean, it's a beautiful time. I guess beauty is what you make of any situation. I've seen lots of resilience in the human race, and especially the people of my country that I'm really proud of. I'm in Zimbabwe, speaking from Victoria Falls. Of course, like the whole world, we were also hit by the unprecedented COVID-19. And I mean, we've evolved from lockdown to loosening a bit of the lockdowns to wearing masks. And alongside that was food shortages, people losing jobs, lots of insecurity in terms of income, and most people moving from the towns to rural areas because there were no jobs. And in particular, my town, Victoria Falls, were tourist attraction. So most of our income really is dependent on people who come here. But then airports are closed, and our big hubs in Africa, like Ethiopia and South Africa, have been closed. So obviously, people were really impacted economically. And, you know, there's a nice, smooth movement between rural communities and the town of trade in food and meats. That was a bit shaken for a bit, and with the unstable weather conditions, general food security has been a challenge even for rural local farmers. But this year was full of hope, but then there came along COVID, which brought further complications. So honestly, what's happening right now on the ground is, I think everyone's just managing really by the day. And what I've really seen is people really took the instructions in very well, and people did the most they could. But then unfortunately, how do you lock down when you don't have food? Yes. So you had to either choose to be killed by either COVID-19 or hunger. And that's really tough to watch your children starve to death. So people took all the risks, but thankfully our cases as of today, they were around 525. Okay. And yeah, 525, and then 64 cases have recovered. We had 6 deaths. Of course, you become thankful because we are aware that it could have been worse, and maybe our health system is not really in a position to handle if the cases were to escalate. So, yes. And then it has also built lots of community and lots of love relation. I saw the spirit of Ubuntu rising in us, which is I share what I have. if one sinks, we are all sinking,
Yeah.
because it doesn't really help for you to feel comfortable around your small space when your neighbor is hungry, because then petty crimes will come in, and that creates conflict and insecurities.
Yeah.
So I've seen lots of resilience really in the human race and in my people, and lots of organizations. I was in the rapid response task force team who were handling the food security. People gave donations to just immediately supply the vulnerable families.
Yeah, I was seeing some really beautiful stories actually in some of the
Yeah,
papers there about neighbors starting to feed thousands of people,
right.
trading in the clothes to get some of the, what is it, maize is one of the staples? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, maize. Yeah,
Maize?
we make
Yeah,
we
yeah.
make a thick porridge called Ischwala, Sadza, Pab, and Shima, depending on what language you speak. It has no name.
Sounding good. And this is
Yeah.
immense because even last November, some of the numbers were like half the population were food insecure before COVID. So that's about 7.5 million people were looking at a meal a day was what they were talking about. So
Yes,
that's just
half of our
increased.
population,
Yeah.
and honestly, we were really coming from one of the worst ever droughts that ever hit us, and
Yes.
we had a very unfortunate situation of Cyclone Idai in the Eastern Highlands, where people flooded to death. And then on the other side of Zimbabwe, the drier area, which is where I am, a total complete failure of crops because there was absolutely no rain.
Right.
So we have seen all those climate extremes, and if you look at the USAID reports at that time, literally this half of the population of Zimbabwe was on food aid for 11 months. That means
Yes.
whatever people harvested, they just fed themselves for just 1 month.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And now you're looking at it encroaching into the middle class, which seems to be like that's sounding like that's more unusual now to have civil servants and healthcare workers and that sort of lawyers struggling to feed as well.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
the unfortunate thing is then we're a farming country, and smallholder farmers really take care of about 70% of food and things like that in our country. But then the escalation of rural populations has also brought pressure in those spheres. So there's a lot of need for things to really change. Especially if we can go back to our industries being open and tourism working again,
Right.
it would really help.
Well, so Precious, and we can hear there's a lot of sort of mitigating circumstances that have kind of led up to this tee-off, to this situation. But what is it about sort of the food systems in Zimbabwe that's creating the lack of resiliency as well, despite everything else, obviously, you're saying that is kind of out of that control, like a drought and um, and like the lockdown itself. Can you talk a little bit about the systemic design and imports and exports, et cetera?
So I guess we are mostly smallholder farm supplied, and 70% of our population about is rural based and subsistently farming to just feed their families. But unfortunately, because of different agricultural systems failing, which I think we'll delve into later when we talk more about regenerative agriculture, seen year after year, whether we have good rains or bad rains, we've seen droughts. So some droughts are really, some people call them pastoral, some people call them man-made, and then you have ecological droughts. So these droughts are influenced by maybe decisions that we've made in our farming practices and how our soils have been depleting over time.
Mm-hmm.
That has led us into really importing most of our foods, and even in a situation where we would have produced our foods, we have sort of a little buying and importing that we've been doing in Botswana, South Africa.
Okay.
And so the borders closed, that chain of supply was sort of threatened, but then it's open to a certain extent. But I think we are all aware now, including most of my really amazing friends in the cities, that we're not really much linked to the soil and the soil story and why it's important for lives to depend on it. I think that everything that's bad that happens always has that
Yeah.
you guys call it silver lining. I'm
Ah,
as creative
yeah.
as possible, so I'll be trying to throw in your statements. Um,
I think that's really accurate. I think that was something we talked about, sort of that phenomenon amongst regenerative agriculturalists in general, where there's either a suffering of the body or a suffering of the land that has them suddenly go, oh, soil is really important. That there is that
yeah,
silver lining. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So soil is really important. So everyone, we have groups of people now who are planting in open urban spaces and school
Oh,
grounds,
wow.
planting vegetables. And
That's
I've
new.
eaten vegetables from my friends' gardens. They're doing much better than I am. So like, where do I store all this? You know, because yeah, like in most cases, I have always been the girl who's always muddy in her hands. But then,
Yeah.
like, everyone has a patch of any vegetables they really want to show you, and they want to do the best, and they want to give you the vegetables. So,
This is really new, right? Is what you're saying?
oh yeah, like everyone will be at work most of the times. But then the importance of food and growing food and the health of soil, you can see that it's really a start. And I think that we who are in the regenerative agriculture movements, be it in urban areas or peri-urban or communal, we have such a challenge now to take up the story using the momentum that COVID-19 gave us. Because everyone
Yes.
suddenly found themselves with lots of time, and then they decided to learn more about the soil. So I do feel like eventually, really, the dependence in uh, unstable and unpromised food systems will have to stop, because South
Right.
Africa also had its own share of problems, and they needed to take care of their population, and to
Yes.
carry a burden of a neighboring country becomes too much, and that
Yes.
makes food here very expensive right now. So products
Yes.
are just going up and up and up, and it's because maybe we didn't have our storehouses in order.
Yes.
So yeah,
It's
I
a
think it's a lot of learning, and we can only go forward from now.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal moment in time for us to kind of consider, especially sort of these economic packages start being developed internationally, like what that money gets invested into and what we're actually pumping forward, especially as we look at, just timing with the carbon allotment we have left to actually keep this under 1.5 degrees Celsius. Like this is the time, and it's going to help with community, whether they engage in that kind of thought process or not, to be going, regenerative agriculture is what we have to do to simply survive. I love hearing that these gardens are popping up, because it was the same here. I was putting in my own, and my mother's just torn up this whole old pool that was in there, and she's got all these, and they're huge. And I'm like, Mom, okay, I don't have to.
Yeah.
This is part of the inspiration of recognizing that we are not resilient enough yet, and we don't have multiple systems there to support and sustain. And you
But
mentioned,
I was just thinking, Aurora, you can imagine, of course, maybe we started planting gardens, we started being aware of food and its importance, and its the importance of healthy food in our societies
yes,
during COVID. So usually the human tendency is, if there's a crisis, we'll align to solve the crisis.
yeah,
And if things get back to normal,
right,
what is our new normal that we're embracing? And I think
right,
that's where our work is at right now as regenerative agriculture, the conversation, the dialogue. It should really try and step up what we had already started, to
yeah,
still see the open urban spaces as sources of food, to
yeah,
still see that link between communal and the towns as a
yeah,
place of trade in the food and keeping the economies alive. So I think
absolutely.
that's the big work that we have.
It is the big work. I think there's a vantage point to it, and also making sure that we're not talking about this as a siloed, separate sort of experience, that these are integrated systems that are reaching tipping points, whether it's, a lockdown, inflation rates, other pandemics that will come, national debt, like all of them interweave into this, the civil unrest that is potentially possible, with a baseline of deadened soils, right? People can't feed themselves. So, I want to make sure as sort of the weeks and months unfold, that complex story is also understood, that nothing is separate from one another, and they're spinning out into a place we're on for a fair amount of chaos. And I think this is one of the ways to mitigate that.
Mm.
Um, I
And
really,
that's the complexity we are managing. Nothing is separate.
no, No, and how can you ride with the chaos, and how can we create from that? Yeah, no, this is the heart of sort of transformative, I think, thinking that I really want to get into with you and your work with the different communities you're involved in. I do want to just really briefly touch, you talked about the mud on your hands, and I just really loved when you shared with me about, a little bit about where you grew up and about your people, who you come from, and when you first started noticing soil.
I have a bit of an interesting story.
Yes, please.
Story time. In Wange communal lands, and one of the communities under Chief Nelukoba or Chief Dingani, it was called Mabale. That's obviously not my original place of birth, but life circumstances brought us there, and I was about 7. So really, that's home. Okay. That's all I've ever known. Growing up with my grandmother, she was a tough and hardworking woman. But unfortunately at that time, so it was a granny-headed household with 7 girls.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Exactly. I was the oldest. And so it was me, my young sister, and 5 cousin sisters. So in Africa, there's a certain thing that when a lady has a baby, sometimes they can't really take their baby to their new marriage. So my cousin sisters suffered that. So they had to stay with my grandmother and us. My dad had passed on, and all that. So so it was, that obviously meant we had little or no things to use to actually make our land productive, be it cow manure. We didn't have any cattle, we didn't have goats, we just had chickens. That I got when we got to that area of Mabale in Wange communal lands. I got it through, it's a beautiful culture called, I'll use the Ndebele word and try and explain it. It's called Ubusisa, which means a person gives you a hen or 2 chickens and a cock, for example, and then they say every time the hens have chicks, you will have maybe 2 are yours, and then you bring the others. And we ended up with a big fowl run of chickens from that. Started really from scratch, but it's really a culture of abundance and giving. But I being the oldest in the home, so I started helping my grandmother in the field. I can hold an ox-drawn plow when we hired it from our neighbors, or when our neighbors came to help us. So really I started interacting with soil from as early as 8, 9 years old. Yeah, and when we worked in people's fields for food, I would go with my grandmother to weed, take out the weeds, and then they give you like a bucket of maize, and then that's what you use for your maize meal. So from that early stage, that totally influenced my thinking, because half the time the crops were failing and it will be hunger after hunger after hunger. So honestly, I think my brains were triggered to just have that natural interest, though I wasn't aware that I had it, but my life just followed that path. I don't know if you know what I mean. And then only now do I look back and say, oh, okay, yeah, I understand. I obviously would have been very curious about it. So in being in a rural area, there were these courses at our junior high school that girls will be in the food and nutrition class and the fashion and fabrics class. I was the only girl in an agriculture class with boys. So starting from there, like so I didn't even do English literature. I went to the agriculture class, things like that. So so I think it became natural, and I had those questions from the start.
Beautiful. So then where did that lead you to? Because you ended up working, getting involved with the Savory Institute. Yes,
and then so this track and this path of my life keeps taking me into natural sciences, geography, agriculture, until I'm at university, which didn't require, by the way, student internships. But I heard about the Savory Center here, the Africa Center for Holistic Management. Yeah. And every time we were on school holidays, I checked myself into the Africa Center for Holistic Management as an intern absolutely for free, because I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the relationship that was going on between the cattle, the chickens, and ticks and birds, and how these animals moved on the land. And this was a center in Wange communal lands. But when you look at it, you look at the grasses that they've grown, the water that they've brought back.
Yes.
It, it looks like you are nowhere near home. And
Yeah.
for me, I thought this is the place. And by that time, most of my friends and colleagues, we were at a university in South Africa. I was in a certain scholarship. And so when you are in school, most people would then just have generally preferred to find jobs in South Africa. I totally came back home. And when I was done with school, I just phoned the center. I was like, hi guys, I'm done with school. And honestly, it was really amazing. There was Alan's son, Roger Savory, who I was working with the whole time. And he said, well, we don't know where to put you, but where would you like to start? So I literally did everything from photocopying to taking care of a lodge that they had. And I was fitting in department after department until I ended up a training coordinator,
Oh,
so
wow.
that's the story. But I've totally enjoyed working with holistic management, and I got amazing privileges to work with Alan and Jody and all the amazing people that have gone ahead of me in that field.
That's phenomenal, Precious. Okay, so you really got seeped in all of it. It's amazing where passion can take you, and you're like, no, that's it. I will do it. Let me in, let me in, let me in. Yeah.
It's a bit of a jumble. You don't know when you actually noticed it, but you sort of track it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I felt, I resonate with that a lot too. I felt a bit similar when I discovered holistic management, and I met Abby and Spence Smith, and I was like, I don't know, but I know I'm coming up. I'm coming to visit. So then how did that lead to Regenerative International and your work as the African coordinator there?
So I worked as an African coordinator at the Africa Center for Holistic Management, but you know, you just keep growing, and I sort of wanted to engage more and you know, expand my knowledge, but still remain in the tracks of holistic management. And so I'm still an accredited professional in holistic management. So I'm still a trainer under Savory Institute. I still partner with the Africa Center for Holistic Management. And then I stumbled again onto Regeneration International, which was really, you know, a bigger picture that I thought, okay, now it's about movement building, inspiring, grassroots, policy, consumers, just keeping that communication alive, that there's actually a new hope of agriculture where humans again can get to dance with nature and actually improve landscapes at much bigger scales. And honestly, they support holistic management, permaculture, all sorts of things that will rebuild our solution, which is the soil. So I really got attracted there, and I spoke for the first time on their World Food Day, and then eventually got invited to be part of the steering committee. So I'm one of the sort of founding members. We discussed, you know, what is the way forward? What is the thing that we can support now? And as an educator in holistic management, I also get to input on, you know, how can we really continue to improve the way we're making decisions and supporting whoever needs our support at whatever time. But it's really a big network building effort that we're doing.
Well, so Precious, can you, you know, we have a variety of people in the audience in all likelihood. Some people are just discovering soil and going, oh my God, this is an incredible solution. And other people who have a greater understanding of the scope of management and what that takes in the interconnected systems that require adjusting for that kind of regeneration to happen. So when you're talking about holistic management, I think it gets easily collapsed with things, with megafauna grazing things, right? They go, it's mob grazing, it's intensive grazing, it's you know, there's all these terminologies that they use in science to kind of express what is essentially just restoring that integral relationship of hooved animals back onto their grasslands. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, regenerative agriculture versus holistic management and for you, what that looks like?
Okay, so maybe I think it's really important for us to just define in simple terms what holistic management is, because what I've seen, like you say, we get like sucked up into the practices or the tools. Yet holistic management is really a framework of decision making. It's a simple framework of making life decisions from household level, farm level, government level, with lots of different aspects in it that would guide you to define what kind of life or what values do you stand for in the future. What do you see your community or your life being? So that doesn't take a farmer only or a government only. I think it's everyone's desire. So it's really a simple decision-making framework that can be used by anyone to manage the complexities of society, culture, economy, and the environments. And I think it easily gets slid or confused into saying holistic management is holistic grazing.
Yes.
Because I think Alan really developed holistic management from his work in Africa, where he was really seeking for answers on what has caused this vast degradation that we are seeing in our African landscapes. So of course with that came along a new tool in the land management, a tool of living organisms, which was holistic grazing, and the behavior of animals that we call animal impact. So holistic management is way broader than that. It's really a framework of thinking and working, and can be used by anyone.
This is brilliant. So Alan already knew that. He already knew that you had to, that it was holding to values and intentions to actually have an impact that you were aiming for. It's an immense strategy and a way to frame your thoughts and to keep you accountable.
Exactly.
Right. This isn't just about
keep you accountable, lots of planning, lots of really, I think, working on your toes, because you are consistently working with a changing environment. The environment is not static. It self-organizes with whatever management tool you put on it. So that's the complexity there. So, I mean, it's really broad and deep, and thankfully we have Savory Institute and research. And all the hubs around the world, and all the educators, and all the Auroras and me's. And so there's a lot of information dotted everywhere that people can access to learn more.
Absolutely. People get very enraptured with the idea of soil and the soil microbiome. And it's a phenomenal, life-altering perspective change. And it absolutely will not regenerate without the management and without the shift in awareness, right? And that's what I always really respected about Alan, was that I just went, oh, he grabbed onto a shift in consciousness that had to come, like a whole different way of living your life. And that's very difficult for humans, right? That human social infrastructure is what I became passionate about. And I went, how does that move? And we know from, even what the UN says, UNESCO talks about culture being the driver of sustainable development and proliferation, right? It's the underlying mantle. And here's your renewable technologies, here's your grazing pattern, right? But the culture and the sub indicators in the culture are going to move it. Like, this is the pizza crust, and there are different toppings we create, but you need a phenomenal crust. And so that's how I think we always have this orientation of going, let's get the renewable technologies, let's do regenerative agriculture. But what you're really talking about is shifting that under the creation or the formation of that mantle and foundation first, and everything else will move. Otherwise, it's like sweeping sand off a beach.
So you look at it from a living systems point of view. And some people say a whole systems point of view. We are, I think, as the human race, we're really intimidated by whole systems or living systems, because we've so much really delved into managing in parts. That's why we really get excited when we're just talking about one practice and not the bigger pictures. Because we love to pick parts and then manipulate them and then fit them in there. But then what else happens around when you fit in whatever part you fit in into an ecosystem? So yeah, I think that's what I've really enjoyed about holistic management. And sometimes it's really difficult to say this is what will work in this environment. You can't generalize to say this is what will work in Zimbabwe, because in Zimbabwe is huge by virtue of, in a family there are 5 people. And those are totally different. Let's start from there without talking about the 13 million, So really it's when we say social cultural constructs, that the complexity there alone, and then the economic construct, the complexity there alone. So it's layers that you're managing, and I think you need that brevity to approach them.
Totally. It takes a lot of courage, curiosity, and humility in my mind, because you are really looking at you were looking, we were talking about, sorry, these layered constructs. And I think when, you know, what we have are sort of these really, and I want to get into culture now with you a bit in the communities you're working with, because there's an affinity, like you're talking about, to go for the little section, to go for the piece, to make it segmented and linear, and to hyper focus. And it's actually a neurological skill set you have to build. It's building a muscle. That way of thinking is a very right brain perspective oriented. The right brain loves to look at the whole picture. It's not a virtue, at least in Western cultures, to really operate within the realm of intuition, of emotive expression, of the holistic picture. That's the right brain's perspective job. The left brain's very linear, it's didactic, it likes to grab, it's very functional that way. But it reduces, right? That's what came up with the scientific method, which is why the scientific method is both brilliant and it's one piece of the puzzle. So this is actually a skill set. We're literally talking about building in the way, in your cognitive processes, in your way of perceiving the world. And so that's sort of like a little formative chunk here, as I want to talk about your work with communities, because I'm fascinated by the cultural aspects, and the different everything from bureaucracies to politics to all of that, because that has been my passion, working with a lot of indigenous communities and government bodies around the world now. And you're a very wise ninja at this stuff. So can you talk to us a bit about No, and that's great, because if you thought you actually were, you wouldn't be. So you are. We could just roll.
In my culture, the young people don't talk a lot. So if you say I'm wise, I get really scared.
Sorry.
We take from the elders. I suppose we sound wise when we talk to other people, but half the time we listen. But it's all right. I'll take it.
No, I think that's really wise. I just know from our conversations, you said some pearls that I wish I could have given to academia, that I had just come out of and just been like, listen to Precious. I'm going to go now, because these are some of them are counterintuitive and they take wisdom building. And that's simply what we're talking about: experience, processing, perspective. So could you tell us a bit about the cultures and the people that you're primarily engaging with, and sort of guiding ethos you may have for engaging with them?
Yeah, and I mean, that's broad, but you can also be throwing in some questions if you feel like there's stuff that is obviously hiding. I'm also from a culture where we don't speak much about what we do, so it's very difficult.
Fascinating. Okay. The ultimate nut to crack. We're so honored. Let's see what happens.
I have lots of jokes about my first encounter with bigger groups of other cultures. Or like, that's a lot about yourself. So, but like, it's not bad, because I think that's only how people will tap into what you are and where you come from. So I've gotten to really appreciate that. But anyway, I work mostly in Southern Africa with partners. So it can be an NGO group that wants to go and facilitate. So you really explore what communities they are working with, because I think if we are to really be culturally relevant, I think it's always prudent to have people of that land spearheading these really critical issues of land degradation and reversing the land degradation and reclaiming back our pride. Because I think I come from a culture of priding ourselves by being able to feed ourselves, being able to take care of our land, which we've lost over time because of many factors that we can't even unpack right now, right here. So that's Southern Africa. I personally come from a tribe called the Ndebele tribe, a tribe of warriors and people of honor. Okay, I'll sound vain, but I really love my people.
I love your people. We want to hear about your people, please, Precious. Don't hide who you are.
Yeah, so we are part of the Nguni clan that obviously ran from a very powerful king down South Africa, but we came down to settled in Zimbabwe. But we still, it's really even the warriors back in the day were people of such high dignity, high honor, and lots of pride in just our culture. So generally, Zimbabwe is really proud of the culture. We are different tribes who work here. And so I've also worked in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, And there's also different tribes there. So I've worked with the Samburu, a bit of the Maasai, and in Uganda with some different organizations where we're just talking about how can we really scale up the voice of all of our small organizations as regenerators. How can we, multiply and amplify that voice? But really, it's just from the grassroots. So the culture is really diverse and dynamic, and most of the communities are led by men who are called elders. And so you can find yourself in that case as a woman facilitator. But I've heard lots of amazing lessons working with these people, which we can explore when you ask me.
Yes. This is
so really, I think that's in a nutshell the type of background where I work in.
Well, so
but
this is
the problems are the same: land degradation, food insecurity, water insecurity, and in some extreme cases, you have social insecurity where people are fighting gun violences, especially in East Africa, for water, cattle raidings, and stuff like that. So so the issues are the same, but the cultural settings and norms are different.
Right. And so you really, I mean, this is something you're going to have to address, is the social sustainability, right? Are these communities actually functioning in a way that is sustainable? And what does that look like on, what we say very freely in the Western culture is individual, independent, like we're somehow in a silo or separate from our interrelationships around us, right? But how is that being sustainable? I absolutely want to unpack this with you. I want to ask people to start please flooding questions in. Seth are going to...
Let me check.
Yeah, Seth is going to start sending, you can send me via text. I'll monitor some of the chat. But what you're starting to touch on is something I find really magnificent and fascinating, and resonates a lot with experiences I've had as well as a woman in my work with these are pastoralists you're talking about, largely nomadic. And they're also patriarchal, extremely so. And I like to kind of, when I teach and I speak with other communities, to understand that, when we say tribe is an anthropological construct, right? This isn't ipso facto unity. We're talking about a group of families, right? And that, I mean, if we just... Clans, yeah, and that's more accurate to what, and if you just think about the diverse opinions that can happen, there's not, in a family, there's not necessarily cohesion and agency is what I'm getting at. I think sometimes in the West here we go tribes and we assume that they're all getting along and everything's fine and everybody's on the same page. Okay, so I want to ask you about so many things in this way, but first of all, you as a woman, which I find fascinating, coming in, first of all, how do you approach, what's your ethos for approaching them? Because you're also looking for social sustainability while you go in.
Yeah, so in most cases, especially in the East Africa, really I was just invited to come and start a dialogue. And so this was an organization called the Gravy Zebra Trust, and they work with amazing people in the Samburu land, but they have vast land where there used to be a flourishing elephants, buffalo, whatever you call it. But every day they've watched their land just wash away. And honestly, they had worked with holistic management in terms of, these guys had been talking about holistic management with the communities. So they said, you could come as a Mandebele girl in Zimbabwe, you could just come and talk to our elders. And I think in my work, what I've really learned is, after realizing that it's a very patriarchal community and the elders who are men, they hold a very important role in that community. The next layer would be warriors, who also hold an amazing role of taking care of animals and defending the area. The elders defend the area by saying certain devotional prayers every morning. They give reports every morning. How are things looking? Is everyone well in your house? At night, did everyone spend the day well? And then women at the same time. These are really organized structures that, to a certain extent, also being a young Southern African girl, I hadn't really experienced firsthand. Yeah, exactly. And some homes, polygamous homes, and so the natural reaction. I'm just sharing with you some of the important things that I've learned in my work, which is some things that I've had to kill in myself, so that I find the people that I'm working with at a place where they are, so that the dialogue is fruitful. Because there's a thing about assumptions, right? So there are two things that I've been learning, and also really chatting with Alan Savory and most people who are doing holistic management and working in communities. When you're planning for the land, or planning finances, or planning actions to do on the land, especially in a self-organizing environment, always assume you are wrong, so that your monitoring is on top, right?
Yes.
So that you know at the first sign that I'm getting the right result or the wrong result, you know it at first hand.
Yes.
But then when it comes to humans, you should always assume that your assumptions are wrong about them. Right?
Mm.
So I am Zimbabwean. I meet a Samburu man or a Maasai man. Maybe there are things that I've heard that they have 10 wives, for example. And then, so certain red flags are raised, and you can be on guard, and then lose out on a chance to converse and probably also share your story, and you hear their story.
Yeah.
So so it's I can't even say it's a skill, it's a sacrifice to assume that your assumptions that you have about such societies, they are not true. These are humans that have lived like this for a long time, and they seem to be working out as a community, as a clan. They haven't let down on how they have been living. You get in there and humbly learn what has kept them going. And when you share with those tribes, because they're pastoral, they don't use the calendar of time that we are using, 2020. No, they want to know where you're from, your tribe, and your people, so that they count that year as a year that Ndebele girl called Precious came and visited us and spoke to us about regenerating our land. And so, and so when you're talking to the elders, you thank them for giving you that opportunity to stand before them as their daughter. First of all, you're African. I'm also from a pastoral community, which has now turned agro-pastoral, but we love cattle. They are a symbol of well-being, of wealth. You relate, you find places of relating. And the warriors, I will never forget how I felt about them. They are very strong and resolute. They're very resolved. If they sit in a meeting and they do not agree with what's being spoken about, apparently they can leave the meeting. So they can get into a meeting and squat for like 45 minutes without sitting comfortably. And then they will sit comfortably as the conversation moves smoothly. And then you can never get that community to sit in a circle. Women sit alone, the warriors sit alone, and the elders sit alone. But my presence in some of these spaces, I've seen that women then voice out. And say, no, the elders are the ones who make the laws of the land, but they have let the ropes down. And and you can see the elders are now like, what? Did you just say that about us?
So it's unusual for that expression.
Yes, it's more unusual. But what I really liked was, even if that statement is said, you don't build on it in that assembly. What I found would be very useful is to pull out the elders and have the facilitators from that area talk to the elders about the statement. Now you're challenging them based on that. To say, look, women are saying you guys are disappointing this system. And I think it's very sustainable, because you are not giving them what to do. You're like, your people say this. What do you have to say about your people saying this? And I've seen that you give them a lead and you keep asking questions and you keep saying, I'm from the land of the brave as well. You guys are also brave. And so you keep challenging each other by where you are from as Africa. What is our pride as Africa? What do we want as Africa? I think find the common ground and learn from there. So that's just a little bit.
No, it's good, because what I'm What I'm hearing is a distinction, like there isn't blame, like you failed, but I'm hearing like we are not rising to the opportunity of the fullness of who we are. We haven't become that in that nobility. That sounds like an evocation of power and of sort of honor and integrity.
Yes,
So,
yes.
right? There isn't. I don't hear shame in that. I hear, please arise. Is
There is
that
no shame. Yeah,
okay?
and it's the best way to take it. It's not a shaming game, because
Amazing.
once you do that, everyone puts on defensive
Yes.
wall, and
Yes.
honestly, it really kills and otherwise a dialogue that would have led to these people planning their grazing.
Yes.
We did like 10 strong communities in like a few days, to just doing the visioning process, defining what do we want. If we look back from on our shoulders, where are we from? How did we used to live? How was our landscape? Thinking at landscape level. And where are we now? How did we get here? Now you're bringing in the issues of management. And then what do we see as our future? What do we want?
This, I mean, this really sounds like a reclamation, a remembering of self. Like when you get so far down the line and you're trying to make things and you're just not conscious to missing or remembering who you are, who your people are, where you come from, or who you wanted to be. You've just lost track of all of those questions. That has, I think it's really a clear that that's in a really emergent, passionate, fulfilling place to live as a human, and that
Mm,
that makes transitioning or transforming the world around, however you're going to manage or what cattle you're going to take on or practices, it gives it a flow and a nourishment to those actions, rather than I have to do that because I'm still trying to survive. And it's not that that
mm,
survival goes away. It's not that it's legitimately on the line, as a lot of our ranchers around the world that we know of in their stories, but particularly in the U.S., have gone through as they transition. It is that rededication and commitment to self. I mean, I'm listening to this, and I worked with a group, rancher to rancher, and we would go with Kent Reeves and Richard King, and we would go stand around basically soil with ranchers and just kind of talk about it, and what
mm.
was present and happening there. And it was really, the inquiry always led to self, like how were they doing? How were their hearts? How were their families, right? And it was this like, and it wasn't necessarily holistic management, but it was the moment of going, are you living within the integrity of the human you know yourself to be? Do you feel good about yourself right now?
What we stand for as a community.
Yes.
Like for example, you have communities that have names of plants, for example, and you're like, so they're like, oh yeah, for example, we used to have this plant. This community was called this by this plant, and you're like, can you show me? They don't have a trace of it,
Yeah.
and you have certain features on that land that shows that this place was thriving once. For example, there is one community called Kanywambizi, which means where zebras used to drink water, right? So that
Ooh.
means that that river was perennial. Zebras and all wildlife would come and drink water. But then now there's no trace of water, and there's no mbizi, or zebras inside to come and drink. So you can build from just those stories and that knowledge. And it's not always a smooth sail, So you now then use your facilitation wisdom to get the conversation going until everyone settles with the fact that coming out of this relies entirely on us. Even if we have a big legacy of big NGOs coming, bringing development, but
Yes.
really just charitable works that have left people really crippled, thinking that rice will come from somewhere. We have to keep stimulating that conversation that our well-being is squarely on us.
Well, that is so. I love this because there's about 4 questions here that, let's see if we can tag together. Again, you're
Mhm.
talking about the empowerment of a people, and I think this is a really important shift for environmental social justice community around the world that wants to support communities where there has been, I'm going to come in and save. I'm going to come in and caretake, as opposed to a genuine upliftment and empowerment that leaves them socially sustainable, creating their own visions, taking their own actions. And I'm really curious about that because you seem to have that ethos on board. How are you ensuring this with the communities you're working with, that you leave and they aren't dependent on you?
Mhm. So the thing about I'm going to come and do good. I do feel like all of our actions, they have amazing intentions.
Yes.
I think that's called the do good framework, the ones that NGOs came in with.
Yeah.
You know, to bring food to the hungry Africa, to bring this to hungry Africa. It was a do good framework, and they were honestly coming to solve a need.
Mm-hmm.
Again, that's managing in parts,
Mm-hmm.
not digging out. If I bring just a bag of maize or milli meal, am I resolving the root cause of what has brought these people here to needing me from outside to bring food to them? So
Right.
I mean well, but it has unintended consequences where everyone's like, oh no, it's fine even if our crops failed. World Vision is coming, for example. I not to label anyone. Yeah,
no,
right.
Totally appropriate.
Mm-hmm. So you know that, okay, it was well intended, but then what we are harvesting out of it, where's this coming from?
Right.
Like, how can we have evolved into a language that says when an NGO, I wish we could find a new word altogether, comes into the spaces of communities, everyone's like, so what do you have for us? It has been a legacy left by charitable deeds that meant well.
Yes.
Right? So when you shift to regenerative work with communities, and I think it's important to always take along social, cultural, economic, and environmental. Otherwise, if we do not do that, it's easy for regenerative agriculture to also look like green revolution, where you're just bringing natural seeds, natural gifts, and leave things as they are. And you still leave the same dependencies. 10 years down the line, regenerative agriculture will become like a greenwashing word again.
Oh,
if
beautiful.
we keep complexities outside.
Absolutely. And that's what I think there's starting to be a vigilance around things like climate smart ag, where it's really the Band-Aid methodology, where it's, I'm going to cover it, it's segmented, it's going to look good, it's going to get money from somewhere, it's going to help in a moment, but it's actually an underlying catastrophe. And quite frankly, from my work with some of the Maasai in Kajiado County, Kenya, like I was very aware of that hit that they took from NGOs. There was a lot of like, this is how I became aware of that legacy being left in some of these communities, that it's done damage.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think as a facilitator or a person who works with communities, you realize that you wear many hats. This cannot be yours, but you are coming as a person to create and stimulate a dialogue. And your understanding is that I'm here as a support. I can be a support. I can be a mentor. I can be a friend. I am here to create relations, and maybe sometimes to be the neutral person to cover gaps between tribal conflicts, between family historical conflicts, between myths that have stood against us for a long time, so that we just are separate and we view things differently. Because when it boils down at the end of the day, especially when you're using the holistic management framework in the conversation, when you create what is called the holistic context, which I love to think of as just the backdrop from which we make our decisions. If we spell out the life we desire, what are our values? We all want the same thing. We all want to thrive. We all want to be sovereign. We all want stability. We all want security. We all want freedom. We all want to express ourselves without fear. We all want a clean environment, clean air. We all want to go to the grave in peace, knowing that our children have a legacy that they'll be proud of, that we once existed. We all want to look back and be proud of what we have done. And that is above any political ideology. It's above religion. It's above any construct that you can think of. We all want the same thing.
Well, so but,
yeah, but to get people to that dialogue now, to spell out what we want, that's where
I feel like
is it.
I feel like this we could talk about for hours, because I mean, but this is really, I mean, just to be fair, like this is the heart and soul of the acorn. That acorn's a nut around here we have that you have to crack, because we often go, let's just do that practice or get them to regenerate the soil. And it's like, what is it when you come up against colliding worldviews, cultural identities, trauma? That's why I was going to ask you about the impacts of colonialism, You know, everybody's got a heartbeat of a history that's throbbing through that door that has to be addressed before there's an open mind frame. Yeah, I'm curious, what are the, you know, what are the signs to you, or are there cultural beliefs, values? Is it a mindset? What has to shift before there's that first step in that transitionary sort of transformation process being possible?
So if I can say, I think in terms of our cultures,
and we have questions.
We have questions. Okay, so I think we will have to chat a little bit and then open up for questions.
Absolutely.
So let's talk first. Let me layer it. Please. According to what I heard. Obviously, colonialism has a legacy on what we became, and now the more, because we're becoming a global village, we have televisions that are showing us the other side of life, that we're thinking, oh, that is better than this. So there's been lots of influences just even above colonialism, and in some instances, some colonial masters shifted our people from their productive lands where they lived and danced well with nature, and created reserves, created a barrier between our wildlife and people, and then put some people in what they called reserves, which are really poor soils for farming. So a lot of destabilizing happened there. And I think because of the introduction of money, industrialization, suddenly even a shift from Ubuntu happened, a shift from abundance, and that space of abundance and generosity happened. And that what we have now, I believe, wasn't our culture. We didn't have a degenerative culture like what is there now, but it's been introduced really by things that we have gone through, traumas, evolutions, where we ended up resolving to looking out for myself more than we, but I. And that I may stand to be corrected, but I do know that that's not the Africa we have. Ubuntu is what we were groomed on, and we moved our animals together. We had clans and groups of people that kept their cattle together. So even this knowledge on holistic management is not new. We have stories of how kings and chiefs had one big kraal, but they belonged to different households. So it was just that space of abundance, that space of looking out for each other. Even if you check socially, how did they live? How, issues of rape cases and thefts were very rare, and the punishments were severe because it was very strange on the land, for example. Yeah, so it was really that space of, I love to refer it as generosity and abundance. But now we have evolved, which is what has been blocking regenerative agriculture, with introduction of the industrialized agriculture, or the big ag, and crops continue to fail. People continue to be in a panic mode, and everyone is looking out for themselves. Scarcity is what we're now thinking from. And half the time when you look at the land, what can it give me? So you go there with one goal of a bumper harvest. I will have a bumper harvest, whatever it takes. And so you forget everything else that is alive in there, that you are learning together with your land to know how you, the land, and all the living things in it are going to thrive. But scarcity and lack is what has led us to being extractive. And that's probably one of the barricades in learning and adopting and accepting regeneration. We have to unlearn all the things that we've been taught about, synthetic fertilizers, all sorts of things that the Green Revolution came with.
It's amazing. So to have an abundant mindset means to have that, gives you that open ability to think long-term, to plan, to strategize. And what I'm hearing is that really nourishing connection that comes from going, I'm interdependent with you. This is a we moment. And that the moment it becomes about me, is the moment everything spins out of control and the dialogue shuts down, or the process of shifting what I think Alan Savory, calls about shifting paradigms. And people often don't understand what that is, but what you're illustrating right there is a paradigm shift, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And that's not been easy, because even our academic structures have been have been set on have been set on manipulating parts, reductionism. So
Yes,
there's a lot to unlearn even from that space. Just the
absolutely.
science in itself. Alan loves to use the example of water. I really love listening to Alan because you're like, every time he speaks, you're like, huh? Have you ever said that before? Like, have I ever heard you say it? Because today it's like something totally
Today it
different.
goes in.
I'm proud of that man, honestly. Anyway, so he says, um, the way we are managing in parts is like when you're managing water. You know, you
Yeah,
think of the chemical combination of water. It's like, can you separate hydrogen from the oxygen
right,
of this water and
right,
manage those two pieces separately?
right.
And I was like, no, how do you do that? It's like, exactly. But that's what we try and do with our environment. We manipulate one thing, and I think it causes, we tumble into one complexity after another, and we find ourselves hopeless. But if we looked at this whole living body of water and you manage it the way we manage it now.
Right.
So,
No,
yeah.
oh gosh, Precious, I want to get to some of these questions here, and I would just, say that with this, and so this is all dialogues and questions that we would love for you to continue in the Soil for Climate group. This series will also have its own page coming up. I'm going to develop that, and also a group so that we can have everybody gathered there as well, and continue this
So maybe
dialogue.
we can look at the questions.
Yeah, no, so I've got some, Seth has been texting some here.
Okay.
And so there's let's see, there's a question about, are there any rainwater collection programs or water related projects in Zimbabwe or any in African region you're working in?
Oh, definitely. Like, there's lots of partners that have incredible water harvesting programs, like including the permaculture approaches of soils, and then actually holistic grazing in itself in the African landscape. There's no way you can dig up the mountains in Africa. It's plenty of land, but the animal hoof in itself, when you grow grass, you've enabled the water, the biggest water harvesting sink that we have, which is our soil. So that too, I always love to look at it like that.
Yeah.
But at a smaller scale, garden scale, there's lots of amazing work with organizations like Select that are doing it in the eastern part of Zimbabwe. In Wange, we have Soft Food Alliance. We have lots of them. We have African Bush Camps Foundation. We have, there's lots.
Lots of
schools,
good stuff.
agriculture programs. So there's lots.
There's an orientation for it.
And these are all like practices, but we bring them in the bigger frame of, okay, let's look at our land at a landscape level. What practice is suitable for what use? Again, you're running away from managing in parts, but understanding that for a small garden, let's get a water harvester. For this, let's use our kettle, because our land is so big. We will not have the money, the energy, and we don't even have the source of money to dig up swales in these big landscapes.
Well, so there's a question here that kind of leads to one I actually had as well, Precious, and I know we're getting short on time, but they're talking about how complex is it convincing governments to use holistic management, especially in the field of farming where it's all about fertilizers and chemicals. I wanted to talk to you about that exact sort of the intersecting realms between worldviews, these paradigms we speak of, and it's great when you're just working with the tribe and it's you, and what happens when you're working with another tribe or academia or government agencies. And how this person's asking, how complex is it to convince the governments?
So let me first of all tackle it from the biggest blockage actually in the regenerative movement. It is professional and institutional egos, because we have developed policies around degeneration and we were not aware, but we've put in so much work and we have research that is backing it up. And to shift, unless and until people at grassroots make enough noise about it, only then do I feel like the policies will be changed? But that doesn't stop us from still knocking in the doors of policymakers, which is what I think, having worked with RI, has been really amazing to know that we can mobilize at grassroots level, communal level, and then still knock the policy doors, because unless and until policy changes,
Yes.
governments will not know how to support regeneration.
Yes.
But as you guys know, I'm sure everyone here will attest that paradigm shift is not an easy thing. It will take a long time. It will take a lot of us talking about it every time. And here in Zimbabwe, actually, we had made lots of progress in terms of introducing holistic management to the Ministry of Agriculture. And at one point, actually, the vice president even came to the Africa Center for Holistic Management.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and we even had a government committee that was going to, it's a scientific committee that was going to, to keep proving and keep spearheading. And we started dialogues with the Minister of Agriculture and the agricultural colleges to see if we can influence the curriculum at colleges. But then unfortunately, this has come in the midst of so many other noises of things that are going on up there. So yes, but there is hope, because I think we still feel, and even right now, that's what Alan is focusing on when you have dialogues with him. His passion now is on policy. Unless and until we have a framework of policy making that will support living systems or whole systems management, we are not winning. We will keep having one policy that cuts across the whole country, and the whole country has got different rainfall regions. How do you implement same agricultural practices
right.
different rainfall scales? So those are the faults of our policies, but
Yes.
you do not blame it, because obviously they are coming from a background of managing in parts and reductionism.
Right.
Yeah, so I think we have done some efforts, but there's obviously a lot more that's going on, which it will take time.
Well, so I want to ask you a couple other questions here, but also, keep in mind, one thing I would love to ask you, sort of what gift of wisdom would you give people who are looking to make a difference in this world of transforming into a, sort of regenerative one? What you're talking about right now from the bottom up transformation, I think it's very easy to go, well, I want to regenerate soil or lobby. And I just know from being in California, from the lobbyists to the shepherds to the ranchers to our markets to our farmers guild, like it's been a symphonic effort to get any kind of legislative traction. And it was all hands on deck, giving a rancher a sandwich and saying, get in my car, we're going to the state capitol so you can talk to your representative, because they have to hear about this paradigm shift, right? And then we got soil initiatives. So that's I think the kind of thought process sometimes we don't go to. We go, well, we're going to vote it in with something at some point, but all the work up to that moment has to happen still. And it's quite fun, but it is a lot of.
But it's intense too. Yeah.
There's somebody was asking what your role, Precious, is in the regenerative grazing project with Maasai shepherds in Kenya. Maybe that's to do with Dalmas. I don't know.
That is Dalma's project,
Right.
but Dalma is like a good friend and a partner. Yeah. We talk a lot and we work together in holistic management.
Makes me wonder who asked that question.
Yeah. But Dalmas is also doing holistic grazing, so it's called Maasai Restorative Grazing.
Yes.
So it's part of the holistic management program.
Yeah, no,
we have another a hub also in the Maasai, right in the Mara. In the Energy Conservancy, but then now there's also Dalmas. So I think the more learning centers or examples we have, the better anyway.
Absolutely. I remember when we started working on that a couple of years ago. So then there's there's just a broad, I'm trying to think how to frame these questions, just a couple here. There's what was the ancient cultivation or ranching like in history? But it's really hard, because we're talking about so many different cultures and regions, and I don't know exactly where they're meant.
Like what I say is that we didn't have a degenerative culture. Obviously, each community knew what word. We had hunters and gatherers, we had pastoralists. So that was, I can't exactly
Yeah.
answer for everyone. But for
No.
my tribe, we had one big herd that was called the king's herd, even if it was just different
Oh.
clans moving animals together. So
So
yeah,
you had, so this is interesting. So you had a mega herd and you had multiple communities tending that herd.
yes, because it will be different clans taking
Right.
care of their own animals. So really, the
Wow.
information is not new, but having Alan having unpacking it, looking at the wild animals in the African rangelands,
Yeah.
he obviously saw that this is what works.
Was.
Having big herds moving together, their behavior being affected by pack hunting animals. So in this case, the human being is the herder who's going to impact the behavior of the animals and where they herd, taking care of the needs of the land, the need of the animal, and the need of the farmer.
Well, so I'm be sensitive to time here. We're totally over. There's one last question here that kind of links up to this, because what you're talking about is a vision that ranchers and shepherds here have been talking about, actually in Sonoma County, California, how you get a mega herd going, especially on lands like the Bureau of Land Management, right? This is national lands that is in dire need of grazing. And there's a variety of limitations of why that would be, but we see that even with private landowners, to have multi-species grazing in a mega herd moving over the, because we have raging fires that are really frightening almost annually now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fantastic to hear that, you know, that was something that was communally done, because it's the community part beyond the legislative part and the other red tag issues that we were looking at. That we,
And honestly, one of the powerful things is to really, and I know sometimes maybe when you use the word holistic context, it becomes a blockade, like, oh no, we're not talking about that holistic management thing again. But just, just, just trying to get consensus by just finding out what people want. And how do you think we'll achieve this?
yeah.
If you look back, and I don't have a big history of America, but you guys had massive herds of bisons. And how did they survive in those environments? So do you think that when you communally came together, will it destroy us or will it work for us? I think it's now just the issue of what dialogue works in what context in your people's settings. What would be an acceptable dialogue to obviously come back to that space where we totally come up with what do we think is best for us.
And
Mm-hmm.
that is a beautiful piece to think about.
And you're saying to me, what is the gift of wisdom that I would give people?
Yeah, well, very often, and you know, I hear interviews with you know, experts, right? I don't even use that term either. Just these experienced
Thank
beings.
you. Please
Yeah,
don't.
I've did my term in academics. I'm out for life now.
Yeah.
Bless them. And even, I have a group I love now and some amazing scientists, but the idea of an expert is so ridiculous to me. So you know, one of the questions I hear thrown down is like, what can I do to make a difference in the world? What action can I take? And we all have different contexts and gifts, abilities, passions. What's a piece of wisdom though? Because you're talking about some paradoxical approaches, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to some layers of nuance to coming at creating a regenerative world. What's a
Yeah. And I
takeaway?
think the piece of wisdom is give everyone a chance to transition from the knowledges that they've held highly for so long. I think as facilitators, our immediate frustration is, why don't they get it? This works. But I think it's a thing of really almost killing yourself. I always say dead to self,
Yeah.
because the brain is ahead of you. You know what works, but then someone has believed for so long that where they are is just perfect. But you also know that there is a possibility of an agricultural practice or approach that can change the whole narrative of this generation. So I think it's a thing of dialoguing, talking, asking questions, and here and there, if you feel like they're ready, throw in a bit of what you know. And you know, you can just say, from what I've seen, you cannot change the whole world, but change one person at a time. Sometimes that's what it takes. And we do not have donors yet who are ready to fund software like trainings, transformation.
Yeah.
We don't have lots of those now. We want donors we have donors who are ticking tables of, we wanted to have 100 boreholes. We now have 100 boreholes, and then they clap hands. And that's it. But then we don't have a lot of donors, but we need a lot of us who are willing to take it one step at a time. It's not a fast process. It's not a microwave process. It's lots of talking and behavior change. The actual work, planning grazing, 30 minutes, you're done. You follow a memo in the chat and the animal on the land. But to actually get people to that space where they will do the grazing plan and follow it through and manage with the 24-letter word, plan, control, manage, replan, all that, it takes a lot more. The technical stuff is everywhere. People can do it, but you have to understand the dynamics socially.
Precious, I'm hoping that one of the silver linings of the 11th hour that we're seeing in our climate, in our communities, is that people will look to leadership like you, if that's what we call it, because I don't know what to honestly call the skill set that you have, but I see it in, you know, these transformative abilities to be with community, to allow them to open to a new way of being in creation, to step forward into their own vision and to implement it, to mobilize, right? And we don't have time, right? As a globe, we don't have time for business as usual, and we need gifted individuals like you to teach that. And so I feel like, you know, I'm hoping the heads of donors will start shifting and go, I want to invest in that, not in the solar fencing. I want to invest in this because that's the easy part, right? I want to invest in the person who can help ignite and enable people into their own remembrance and power. And I don't know what that is, or how we qualify what a being is that does that, or give it a name. But I think, I hate to say it like this, but I think there's a market for it based on what the world needs right about now, you know? So.
Well, like, my only hope is that the future generations will be happy we once lived. That's my only hope. I hope we'll leave enough, a little seed. And I think every day is a time to just plant a seed of hope, a seed of different thinking, even if you don't see it popping right there and then, because it's tempting to also put yourself under pressure to see action. But sometimes it's just planting seeds and watering them slowly.
Absolutely. No,
But
and
thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Precious. It's such a treat. I'm going to post one other question, I think, in the Soil for Climate group. We'll make a group of this for sure, of the Women of Regenerative Ag, so we can all stay connected. It's part of the goal of this series, is so people can start interacting and talking about these line of questioning as well. We're so grateful for your time. Thank you, Precious. Thank you for your work and your integrity. I love the way you have communicated and told me what matters to you, and it's inspiring for me and for everybody here today. Seth, Carl, thank you so much for being in the background there, and to RE Botanicals, the hemp apothecary. We'll be here next week with Amber Smith, who's the program director for the Women in Ranching, another phenomenal, wise, wicked thinker with a wonderful heart, doing incredible work in the world. Precious, thank you. Really.
Thank you. Thanks, Aurora. Yay.
Yay. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay.